Good morning. Please be seated. We are on the record in State of Arizona versus Ramon Luna Bueno, CR 2014-149887-001. Council appearances, please.
Good morning, Judge. Ellen Dahl on behalf of the state.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. Vernon Lorenz appearing on behalf of Ramon Luna Bueno. He's present in custody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And good morning, Mr. Bueno.
Good morning, Judge.
Is there anything we need to address before we bring in the jury?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
All right, let's bring them in, please. Ms. Dahl, your witness is here.
Yes, Judge.
Thank you. Welcome back. I'm sorry for keeping you waiting. I had a particularly busy morning and we just finished, so we are now ready to proceed with the trial. With that, would the state like to call its next witness?
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Jacob Rasmussen to the stand.
Mr. Rasmussen, if you could please come forward and be sworn in by the clerk.
Hello. Can you please state and spell your first and your last name?
First name is Jacob, J-A-C-O-B, last name Rasmussen, R-A-S-M-U-S-S.
Thank you. You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Yes, my name is Jacob Rasmussen. My badge number is 9140. I'm currently assigned as a detective to the homicide unit with the Phoenix Police Department.
Detective Rasmussen, could you please share with us your training and experience?
So I've been a police officer for just shy of 12 years. I spent 5 years in the patrol division. After that, I went to the night detective unit, which basically covers all of violent crimes at night when detectives that are on during the day are at home. That's where I was assigned in 2014 when I worked on this case. I spent about 3 years there. After being in the night detective division, I went to the robbery unit. I spent about 3 years there. And then this past March, I moved over to the homicide unit.
Thank you, Detective. You did reference in anticipating the question what your assignment was back in October of 2014. You said you were a night detective?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to turn your attention to that day, October 8th of 2014, and the days following that. Were you part of a large-scale effort to identify those involved in the shooting of Troopers Cruz, Casey, and Alfano?
Yes.
Please tell us about your involvement regarding the impounding of items of evidence that would later become important to the investigation.
So initially, on the first day of the investigation, which I believe was October 8th of 2014, I was working on a different case. I was contacted by my lieutenant at the time and asked to go to what was Good Samaritan Hospital at the time to do some hospital follow-up, reference Trooper Casey being there. I went there, conducted my follow-up there, and returned back to the scene at 1624 North Black Canyon Highway the night's in. When I arrived there, I made contact with Sergeant Barrett, who was assigned to the homicide unit at the time. Checked in with him, let him know what I had gotten from the hospital. He indicated to me at that time, and I had gotten there at about 9 o'clock to talk to him, that there was a secondary scene that he needed help processing that was just down the way from where they were at about 302 South Black Canyon Highway or 23rd Avenue, the frontage road on the west side of I-17 essentially, and the railroad tracks.
Before you go any further, I'm going to put what's been admitted as Exhibit 272 up on the Elmo. Detective Rasmussen, what area were you talking about when you referenced the quote secondary scene?
So if you look at the map here, it's a little bit blurry on my screen. Maybe it's easier up there. So you can see where it says I-17 there. If you go somewhere around about where it says Alexander Park on the map right there, are the train tracks. And so it was basically, the train tracks run east-west right there, and we were processing a scene that we learned was contained to the north side of the tracks.
Jacob, I want to show you, well, tell us, how did you process that scene?
So initially, when I arrived at the scene, I had been told that information was received that a vehicle matching the description of the vehicle we were looking for had been seen by an individual traveling along the north side of those train tracks. 2 individuals were seen getting out of that car. And so prior to my arrival, a canine unit was sent down there. A search was conducted of that area. Some items of evidence were located on the north side of those tracks. When I got there, there were marked units set up on 23rd Avenue, so basically the east side of our scene. And then there were, we were kind of short on marked units that day. As you can imagine, there was a lot going on. There were some unmarked units, but officers on the west side of that scene, kind of securing that entire area because of the items of evidence or interest that they had located there.
What items of evidence did you find in that area that you impounded?
So I walked the entire north side of the tracks and the entire south side of the tracks from 23rd Avenue to 27th Avenue. Initially, when things had started rolling, it was dark, it was now light outside. I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything. There were some cartridges, so full bullets and casings on the north side of the track. I believe there were 3 or 4 of them. There was also a white t-shirt that appeared to have what was some apparent blood and possibly a hole from a projectile or a bullet in the shirt on the north side of the track, and some grass.
As part of your duties as a detective, were you there with someone who was photographing the area at the same time?
Yes, I had 2 crime scene specialists with me who were photographing. We documented some other things, some possible foot impressions and tire impressions, and so they were taking photos of those things and working to collect that evidence for me.
Were you looking for a particular type of ammunition or weapon at that point?
At that point, no, I wasn't looking for anything in particular. It was just noticing that there were the cartridges there. We had been dealing with some weather that week. It had been raining. At one point, as I was getting ready to leave the scene, it started raining again. Those cartridges appeared as though they were freshly put there. There didn't appear to be any dust or debris or dirt or anything stuck on them. They looked like they had been there or deposited there recently.
Now, about what time were you at that scene?
I arrived at that scene at approximately 9:05 hours.
Now, was that prior to the Mercury Sable, in this case, having been found by investigators, if you know?
I don't know specifically if the vehicle had been located at that point.
So this was less than 6 hours after the shooting?
Correct.
I'm now going to show you what's been admitted as Exhibit 168. What is this that we're looking at in terms of the protocol that's used in investigations?
Right, so what you see up on the Elmo right now, when the crime scene specialists come out to a scene, they will get the information from me as the scene investigator as to where we're at, what the report number is, things of that nature. Prior to taking any photos, they'll fill out one of these cards. You can see on the top it's got the incident or report number, the date, the time that they're out there. It's got the radio code, their serial number, or the person that's taking the photos, the squad they're assigned to. The location is the original location of the incident, so that would have been the Knights Inn. And then you can see in the information they've written seen and then taken at 302 South I-17 Access Road or Black Canyon Highway, which was the address that we were at, or the nearest address to the train tracks off of 23rd Avenue. And then at the bottom you can see that they corrected that original location. Instead of 1654, it was 1624 North Black Canyon Highway.
And I'm going to put what's been admitted as Exhibit 145 up on the Elmo. What is this?
This is a photo of, I believe it's the box that controls the arm for the railroad crossing at 23rd Avenue, or the frontage road there on the east side of the scene.
Is it typical for the crime scene specialist to take pictures of corners, which may have a street name on it, to help identify which photographs go to which location?
Right, so every time we go and take photos somewhere, we'll try and take a photo either of like a house address or a street sign showing cross streets, or something that more than likely is not going to be moved if we ever have to recreate where this is taking place. And that box was one of the items that they took a photo of to do that.
Detective, I'm putting what's been admitted as Exhibit 144 up on the screen. What is it that we're looking at here?
So here you can see a photo that is shooting from the north side of the train tracks back east, where you see the patrol Tahoes in the background. Right over here, and it looks like there's some patrol officers there. That's 23rd Avenue, or the frontage road. And then there, I think you can see the box kind of off to the right, the one that you just showed me the picture of. Right, that gray box right there.
I'm now going to put what's been admitted as Exhibit 159 up on the Elmo. What part of the process are we at here that's being documented?
So this is, again, documenting kind of the scene overall. They very graciously seem to have placed me in the photo. You can see these little yellow placards here. Those we use to document the items of evidence that we're going to collect. A number indicates something that we are taking with us. So in the foreground here, you can see that number 2. That was one of the cartridges that I told you about. So that's basically saying this is one of the items we're going to take with us. And then just to orient yourself with the photos, these placards are always pointing north. So the tail on the placard that you see kind of jutting out at that right angle is always going to be oriented to the north, so we know which direction we're dealing with in the photos when we're looking at them.
Thank you, sir. And this is a little out of order, but what are we looking at in Exhibit 146?
So this is that same side of the track, but just from the 23rd Avenue side. So now you're shooting from where you saw the officers in the Tahoes. They're behind the camera, and it's shooting west.
To orient ourselves, was there some graffiti along that road?
Yeah, so this building here that's got like the tin sides on it belongs to a company by the name of HPI. That was the 302 South 23rd Avenue. And then it ran to where it connected with this brick building, and there was graffiti all over that brick wall.
I'm now putting what's been admitted as Exhibit 153 up on the Elmo, sir.
So where we pointed out that brick wall that had the graffiti, along that brick wall on the far north side of the train tracks before it hit the business property line, you can see the grass there. You can see very faintly in the bottom left corner is the number 1, and there is a white, what is a white shirt that's crumbled up in the grass behind it. When I spoke of the white shirt that had the apparent blood and possible projectile hole in it, this is the shirt that we recovered on the north side of the tracks, very near those cartridges.
I'm now putting Exhibit 154 up on the Elmo. Is this the condition in which that item you were talking about was found?
Yes, it is.
Is it typical to document the item as it sat when found before moving it?
Yeah, and so you'll notice as we look at these photos, you'll see the first one was kind of everything overall. Then you get one that's got the item in the picture but is further back. They take this other one as we come up, so we can kind of really get an idea of where this item was, how it was sitting, before we start picking it up or disturbing it in any way. Prior to this, in talking to the officers and everybody else, nobody had touched or disturbed this item. It was as it was when they found it.
Is that similar to the cartridge casings that were found?
Yes.
Now putting Exhibit 155 up on the Elmo. What's happening here?
So this is the shirt. It's now been obviously picked up off the ground. You can see toward the bottom, there's a reddish brown stain. That is that appeared to me to be apparent blood. You can see, if you look closely, a small tear toward the top right-hand portion of that reddish-brown stain. That tear is the possible projectile hole that I told you about.
I'm now going to put Exhibit 157 up on the outline. Was it important to the investigation, the condition of the shirt?
Yes.
Did it appear to be dry and not wet?
Yes.
And you've been to multiple crime scenes, is that fair?
Yes, I have.
And have you been to multiple scenes where there was recently an injury?
Yes, I have.
Can you tell, based on your training experience, sometimes whether blood is fresh or whether it has been there for a while?
Yes.
Did this appear to be fresh blood?
Yes, it did.
And was it important to you the location of it on the shirt?
Yes, it was.
Where was the hole in the shirt?
So in looking at the photo, you can kind of see now that it's unraveled, in the center of this larger stain on the right side, you can see where you get a little white shining through on there. That's the other side of the shirt, is where the hole was.
I'm now going to show you 156 is at the front of the shirt.
Yes, it is.
Did there appear to be no hole in the front of the shirt?
No, not that I saw.
In that same area, you mentioned that there were some cartridge casings that were found.
Yes, there were.
I'm going to show you what's been admitted as Exhibit 162. What are we looking at here?
So you'll see the placards again, which are denoting evidence. In this particular photo, you see one that has a letter on it. The reason that that's different and a letter, not a number, is that's not something we're taking with us, but it's something that we're photographing. So this more than likely is possibly a shoe impression or a tire impression that we would take really good photographs of, but aren't necessarily going to be taking anything with us to impound as evidence that we would bring in here that you could see. So you see the numbers here, 3, 4, and 5. Those are each denoting one of the cartridges that were out there at the scene and collected as evidence.
Who was the crime scene technician that was working with you that day?
There were two. So there was one of the CSS's, her last name was Atkinson.
Was it Elizabeth Atkinson?
Yes. And I believe the other one was D. Peterson.
You may. Excuse me, you may.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as exhibit for trial. Exhibits 16, 17, 18, and 19. I don't believe those are in evidence at this time.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Exhibits 16, 17, 18, and 19 are admitted and may be published. Did I miss one? 16, 17, 18, 19?
No, you did not.
Okay, thank you.
Detective Rasmussen, what is it that is in exhibit 16, 17, 18, and 19?
Each of these appears to be one of the cartridges that were recovered from that scene in each of the bags.
I'm going to put exhibit 2. I'm sorry, exhibit 161 up on the screen. Does that appear to be one of the items that was collected?
Yes.
You had mentioned the condition of the ammunition. Was that the condition that it was in?
Yeah, so it's important when we go in an outdoor scene for us to look at the condition of the items that we're looking to collect. Obviously, especially being that we had been dealing with some weather at the time, you can see the ground is damp. If there were items out there that I was seeing that had dust and dirt or looked like they had watermarks or something on them, and those might indicate something that possibly had been there for a longer period of time than an item like this that appears to be relatively clean, doesn't have any visible dirt, water stains, anything like that on it. So each of these items appeared that way, and that's why they were marked and collected.
Did you note the type of ammunition
Yes.
And what type of ammunition was that?
Just to be sure, if you don't mind, I refer to my notes.
Would that refresh your recollection, Detective? Yes, please do.
So each of those items, and referring to my supplement, or scene supplement, which is supplement 237, I'm not sure what the Bates number is for that for you. The head stamp on each of these, well, each was a 357 caliber round, and the head stamp on each of these 4 rounds was the same. It was a Winchester 357 mag, was the head stamp.
357 what?
Mag,
Mag.
or 357 Magnum, which is the actual round and caliber.
I'm now going to put Exhibit 164 up. Is that another one of the cartridge casings that you impounded?
Yes.
With the team? Exhibit 166
Yes,
and Exhibit 167.
yes.
Did you submit the items that, did you or another member of the team on that day submit the items for any testing?
Yes, so prior to all the items, or the scene being completely processed, I left. Detectives Rostenberg and Alberta were there and they kind of finished everything up. However, being in the situation that we were in, and it being important that we run some of our evidence immediately in order to identify possible suspects or people that we're looking for in the case, I was asked to take the shirt that you saw the photos of, item number 1 that was collected.
Well, let me approach. I'm going to show you what's been admitted as exhibit number 66. You referenced item number 1 in the photograph, the bloody shirt that you impounded.
Yes.
What did you do with that?
So at about 11:20, CSS Atkinson gave me this shirt. I took this shirt, which was in a bag. I took it to the Phoenix Crime Lab. When I got to the crime lab, I had to create a supplement to impound the item so that it got a barcode so that we could track it and keep track of our chain of custody. I then created a supplement to request lab tests being done on it, basically saying, would you please screen this for any biological evidence and run the biological evidence to see if we can identify any people of interest in this case. I then took the shirt to one of the lab personnel, Cynthia Gutierrez. I was told that she was going to coordinate with the DPS crime lab to get this run immediately. After I transferred it over to her, excuse me, I received a call from Detective Thomas at the DPS crime lab. He wanted some information as far as where was the shirt found, what did I see on it, what information did we have as it relates to the shirt, and then my understanding was a sample from the shirt was going to be sent up there.
And so it was sent to be tested?
Yes.
And so any analysis of that would be done by someone other than you?
Correct.
I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Lorenz.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Detective.
Good morning.
You testified about some, I think you called them shoe impressions.
Yes.
Do you know if those were ever compared to the footwear that Mr. Bueno had on when he was arrested on the 15th?
That I do not know. Typically, those requests would be made by either the case agent or the scene agent.
And how about the cartridges? Those submitted for DNA or fingerprints?
I don't know that yet either.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any follow-up?
Let me have a moment, Your Honor. You're familiar with shoe impressions, correct?
Yes.
Would you need to have a known shoe to compare to a shoe impression?
Yes, obviously, as you know, shoes are a mass-produced consumable item for the most part, unless you have a custom-made pair of shoes. Most people do not. So in order to use a shoe impression in a case, you would need to collect a shoe which you believe either the tread pattern or the size are similar to the shoe impression that you have taken, and then that shoe can be compared to the shoe impression, both size and tread pattern, depending upon how good the shoe impression is, in order to say, yes, this shoe could have made this shoe impression, but obviously we can't say that it was exactly the shoe that made it. We can just say this shoe could have made this.
Now, is it helpful for someone to be immediately apprehended so you know exactly what they were wearing at the time of the crime?
Yes, especially when you're dealing with shoe impressions and trying to get like shoes.
And in this case, are you familiar with the fact that Mr. Bueno was not caught until a week later?
Yes, it was a very long week at work.
Are you familiar with the fact that he may have changed his appearance and clothing in the week?
Yes,
Now, you're also familiar, based upon your role as a homicide detective, correct, that there can be ballistics testing that is done to compare a spent projectile to a firearm, correct?
correct.
In this case, do you know if a firearm was ever recovered?
I do not know if the firearm was recovered.
But do you know that based upon your training and experience, you would need to have a firearm to do that type of analysis?
Yes, I do.
And okay. The blood that was found on the shirt, did that appear to be a lot of blood for a gunshot wound?
A lot of blood, no.
And you're familiar with wounds, right?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope of cross.
I will allow it, but I will also allow you to ask additional questions.
Thank you.
In this case, does everyone respond differently to the no. Based on your training and experience, does the physical body respond differently to different injuries?
Yes, it does, from person to person and incident to incident.
But in this case, the blood appeared to be fresh.
Yes, it did.
Nothing further.
Mr. Lorenz, any
I have no
follow-up?
follow-up. Thank you, Judge.
I see no juror questions. Does anyone have one? Seeing none, that does conclude your testimony. Thank you very much for coming in. You are excused.
Your Honor, if Mr. Lorenz and I could have 1 minute, we're just going to confer on an issue and then...
Absolutely. And those of you in the jury box, if you want to stretch or in place, you're more than welcome to. Get more water. And while we're waiting for those of you in the jury box, I just want to reiterate, if at any point testimony is getting long and tedious and you can't sit a moment longer, you're more than welcome to stand up even during testimony if you want. Just please do not come in front of the bar with the microphones, but you can stand back along the wall, or if you wanted to move and stand in the back of the row back there, you can do that as well. Call your next witness.
I was thinking, I'm sorry, as I walk forward and clean up. State calls will put that out to the stand. Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Beddow, if you could please come forward and be sworn in by the clerk.
My name is Michael, I-C-H, last name B-E-D-D-O. You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Beddow. What do you do for a living?
I am a forensic firearms examiner for the Phoenix Police Department Crime Laboratory.
What does it mean to have that position?
The position of a forensic firearms examiner is a scientist that analyzes evidence associated with crimes involving firearms. So the guns themselves, ammunition, both fired and unfired, and other associated items of evidence.
How are you qualified based upon training, experience, and educational background to hold that position at the crime lab, sir?
I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Northern Arizona University. I have a master's in forensic science from the University of California, Davis. Post-graduation from the University of California, Davis, I worked for approximately 4 months as a laboratory technician assigned to the firearms section of the Sacramento County District Attorney's Crime Lab in Sacramento, California. Since that time, so January 2008 to present, I've been employed in the firearms section within the Phoenix Police Department Crime Laboratory. My training is approximately a 2-year training program. Basically, the first 2 years of my employment are an intensive training program taught by senior members of the firearms section, as well as classes from firearms manufacturers, as well as other firearms examiners from around the country.
Are you a member of any associations or any accreditation?
I am a member of the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners. It's an organization specifically dedicated to the research and furtherance of the science of forensic firearms comparison and examination.
And is the Phoenix Police Department an accredited lab?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Before we talk about your involvement specifically in this case, I'd like for you to share with us how, what you know about revolvers versus semi-automatic handguns.
Absolutely. We'll start off with semi-automatic handguns. So the idea of semi-automatic handguns is for every single pull of the trigger, a cartridge will be fired. That the energy produced by that discharge will cycle the action of that gun. So generally a slide on the top of the gun will move rearward, extracting the fired casing, ejecting it from the gun, and then as it travels back forward, given additional ammunition in the firearm, it will load the next round. That entire cycle will occur for every single pull of the trigger. So every time the trigger is pulled, that will be repeated until the firearm is out of ammunition. Additionally, with semi-automatic handguns, the ammunition is held in a generally an external component that has to be manually inserted into the firearm, known as a magazine. So moving on to revolvers, revolvers ammunition is...
Well, did you bring something to help you explain your testimony here today?
Yes, ma'am.
And has that been marked as Exhibit 279?
That is correct.
Your Honor, for purposes of explaining testimony, not to be moved into evidence, I'm going to put, if the court allows it, Exhibit 279 up on the Elmo.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 279 may be published.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Beddow, explain to us how a revolver works.
So what we're seeing in this image is a generic drawing of a revolver. So as I just mentioned with semi-automatics, the ammunition is housed inside a magazine that's generally inserted into the firearm. With a revolver, the ammunition is housed in a component which is referred to as the cylinder. The cylinder in this image is the round portion.
You need to slow down.
Oh, I apologize. The cylinder is the round portion directly above the trigger in this image. So that is a component that houses the ammunition. So the cylinder will hold all of the chambers, as can be seen in the lower left-hand corner of this image. So what makes it a revolver with the definition is that when the action of the firearm is cycled, that cylinder rotates or revolves, thus bringing the next chamber in line with the barrel for the firing process. Revolvers can be fired in a number of different ways depending upon their design.
I'm going to ask you a very basic question. Is there something about a spent casing or after a bullet has been fired where it goes in a revolver versus a semi-automatic for those of us who may not be familiar with firearms?
Absolutely. So with the semi-automatic firearms, the fired casing is extracted and ejected as part of that firing process. With revolvers, the fired casings are maintained inside that cylinder until they are manually removed by an individual.
Typically, would you see a muzzle flash if you were close to a handgun being fired?
That is correct.
Are you always going to see a muzzle flash, well, what is a muzzle flash?
For definition of muzzle flash, so during the discharge of a firearm, the gunpowder inside the cartridge is burning, creating the pressure sufficient to push the bullet down and out of the barrel. When that occurs, some of that burning process is still occurring right at the muzzle or the end of the barrel as the bullet exits. And so given the right conditions, you can see part of this flash, basically a small fireball, if you will, right at the end of the barrel at the moment of discharge.
So is there a way to estimate then where the end of the barrel is when the gun is being fired?
If it is sufficiently close enough to an object, that debris that is within that muzzle blast or muzzle flash can be deposited on a surface. So yes, if it's close up against something, absolutely.
You're also familiar with shooting scenes, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
In this case, are you aware of the fact that the scene was at the Knights Inn, a hotel along I-17 in McDowell Road?
Based on item descriptions, yes.
And is that based upon what you learned as part of the investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
Having familiarity with multiple shooting scenes, is it common to not find all of the projectiles that had been shot?
It is very common, especially in outdoor scenes, for many of the bullets that are fired to never be recovered. And this is just due to the nature of our environment. The bullets disappear, whether they go into dirt, hit something and fragment, and then those fragments fall into something else. It's very common to not find all of the fired bullets.
What about expended shell casings, for example, from semi-automatic handguns? Are they going to fall exactly where shots were fired?
They will fall within relative proximity. Some firearms will eject them farther than others. Some will fall within a couple feet of the shooter. Some can project them out numerous feet.
What are the conditions which may determine where that expended cartridge casing went?
Dealing with semi-automatic handguns, the location of that will be based upon A, how far the firearm physically ejects that casing, B, the orientation in which the gun was being held at the time of discharge. Majority of all semi-automatic handguns eject the casings to the right and slightly to the rear when held in a traditional shooting fashion. So if you change that, it'll change where they're ejected as well as the surface at which they land on.
Is a hard road a surface which will, how does that affect where they go, if at all?
Landing on it has the potential for them to bounce and roll.
What is hollow point ammunition?
Hollow point ammunition is ammunition specifically designed with a hollow cavity in the tip or nose of the bullet, designed for that bullet when it impacts anything liquid-based to expand or open up, commonly referred to as mushrooming.
What is the other type of ammunition that is common?
The second most common type is what we refer to as full metal jacket. So it's a lead core completely encased in some sort of metal jacket, typically copper.
Is one type of ammunition more lethal than the other typically?
I wouldn't speak to lethality because, in my opinion, lethality is based on location of the shot. So the lethality wouldn't matter if both shots were to the arm. The primary difference between the two is you have less likelihood of over-penetration or through and through, if you will, with a jacketed hollow point because they're designed to open and attempt to transfer all of its energy to the target.
You mean stop once it hits its target?
Yes, ma'am.
Why is it that law enforcement typically uses hollow point ammunition?
Law enforcement typically will utilize hollow point ammunition to prevent it from passing through, causing damage downrange, so incidental witnesses or incidental victims beyond their target.
Going through walls?
They will still pass through walls just the same. They will not expand outside of anything that is liquid-based.
In this case, did you analyze some of the ammunition that DPS cruisers, DPS troopers Cruz and Alfano had?
Yes, ma'am.
And what type of ammunition did they have?
Their primary service weapons were loaded with ammunition manufactured by a company named Spear. The cartridge designation was 40 Smith & Wesson, and the model of the ammunition is referred to as Gold Dot.
Would that become important later when you're analyzing other pieces of evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
What type of firearms did they have?
Their primary duty weapons were manufactured by a company called Sig Sauer.
Could you talk to us about, on the revolver, the cylinder gap?
Yes, ma'am. If I may approach the screen here, it'll be easiest for me to point, or would you like me to do it on the screen here?
Either one is fine.
Could you please stand up, sir? Thank
Yes.
you.
So this cylinder that's on this revolver, in order to load and unload, swings out to one side of the revolver. When it closes, the small area between the front of the cylinder and the back of the barrel is known as the cylinder gap. This is just a space that is required to allow that cylinder to close. So what happens when a revolver is discharged, the bullet that is housed inside the cartridge within the cylinder must jump across that small gap before reaching the barrel. This is just a feature that is present on all revolvers. A side effect of that is some of the gases and heat created during the firing process escape sideways out that cylinder gap.
Frequently, when that gas and heat escapes, is there evidence of that event left behind?
Just like with the muzzle blast, if the revolver is sufficiently close to an object, that debris can be deposited on whatever that surface may be.
Is there a term for that?
It's just, we would refer to it as either cylinder gap or muzzle blast marking, and potentially some other features associated with it, such as burning, charring, or tearing, depending upon what the surface may be.
The muzzle flash. If a gun is discharged, will a person who witnesses or is looking in that area always see a muzzle flash?
I would say no, ma'am.
What factors must be taken into consideration in terms of the perception of the muzzle flash?
Factors that will come into play will be the ammunition and firearm combination, lighting conditions, direction of the observer to the firearm itself, so whether they're behind, to the side, to the front, as well as other physical factors, so like whether you're blinking and how well you're concentrating on the firearm at the time of discharge, because it's extremely brief.
At this time, Judge, the state moves Exhibit 278 into evidence.
No objection.
Exhibit 278 is admitted and may be published.
Tell us about what you did in this case as part of your role at the Phoenix Police Department Crime Lab.
The first request that was asked of me was to perform what we call a function test of one of the officer's duty weapons. I was subsequently also asked to analyze some bullet jacket fragments, and then additionally, in a third request, analyze some additional bullets.
Did you have the opportunity to look at the condition of the blue Mercury Sable that was impounded in this case?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Did you look at that in concert or to help you analyze the items of evidence that were taken from that Mercury Sable?
Wasn't in concert. It was at the request of the detective to come down and just take a look at the car.
I'm going to put what is been admitted as Exhibit 263 on the OMO. Image L. Was this one of the things you looked at on the blue sable?
It appears to be yes.
And let me first, in fairness to you, put Exhibit 27. Prior to you testifying today, did you look at a whole bunch of different photographs?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you pick those that you believe would be best, help you explain what you did in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm now going to put Exhibit 278 up on the Elmo, Image A, for the record. Mr. Beddow, what are we looking at here?
We are looking at the roof of the vehicle with the front of the vehicle to the left of the image.
Can you see the broken back window to the right?
Yes, ma'am.
Counsel, can I ask just for my own reference? Exhibit 278 appears to be a collection of photographs. It's images A through,
Partner, it's images A through QQ.
thank you.
In image A, what are we looking at here?
Once again, it is the roof of the vehicle with the front to the left, rear to the right. Across the bottom, you will see 3 bullet impacts that are traveling in a direction which would be from the bottom of the image to the top, and then an additional bullet impact in the top right that would be traveling from the right to the left.
Your Honor, may the witness stand up?
You may.
Could you go to that image, sir, image A, and point, could you determine based upon what you saw there, the direction of where that defect was created?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us about that. What did you learn based upon your expertise when you look at the condition of the car's roof?
Looking at the roof of the vehicle, this particular defect, so the one farthest on the left, is once again traveling in this direction, so from the bottom of the image to the top, and is a ricochet. So,
Is that P for the record?
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
There we go. So the impact labeled as P is what we refer to as a ricochet. So the bullet did not penetrate or go through the roof. It hit and came off. Image Q.
Well, wait, what direction was the bullet traveling?
Going from the bottom of the image to the top.
So would that be from the passenger side?
It would be from the driver's
Sorry,
side.
I keep doing this wrong. Where? From which side of the car?
Going from the driver's side towards the passenger side of the vehicle. And that's the same for all 3 of these images for labeled defects, which would be P, Q, and I believe that bottom one is N.
N as in Nancy? Is that correct?
I believe so, yes. N is in Nancy. Looking at the image, it's difficult to read that bottom label.
Right.
Yes, it appears as N is in Nancy.
Okay. How can you make that determination regarding the direction of travel?
When a bullet impacts a material, there will be specific features that are cues that will allow us to determine what direction the bullet was traveling. One of the key features, once again, we'll start with impact labeled as P as in Paul, is this entrance, or which we refer to as lead-in or pinch point. And this is specific to painted metal. So what happens is if a bullet is coming in at a shallow angle, it will, in essence, crease the paint before it begins to chip the paint off and actually defect the metal. And this can be seen on all 3, as well as on Q and N, as in Nancy. The trailing end of the defect, so the defect going away, Q and N, the projectile went into the roof. So did not ricochet off, actually penetrated in.
And we'll talk about how you can tell us where they went in one moment. I'm now going to put image F up. What are we looking at here?
Image F is the rear of the vehicle, looking at the trunk and rear bumper as well as the rear window.
Is it typical to mark these types of defects to the car?
Yes, ma'am. All the bullet holes or suspected bullet holes will be marked for documentation and analysis.
And then tell us about the rod process. What is that?
So in order to determine potential origin of where that shot was fired, our crime scene specialists and detectives will utilize what are referred to as trajectory rods. These are thin rods typically made of fiberglass that will be inserted into one of the bullet holes, and it must come into contact with 2 points. So if it's just a thin piece of sheet metal with no additional impact site, we cannot use the rods. So let's say you're dealing with the trunk, you have a hole in the outside of the trunk and where it exited into the trunk. So now you have 2 points of contact. So that rod can be placed through there so that we can then trace back to a potential location of origin of where that shot was fired.
Now I'm going to put exhibit K. Image K from that exhibit up on the image. Is it important to document the interior vehicles prior to them being processed?
Absolutely. Both interior and exterior vehicles will be documented thoroughly before any of the labeling as well as after.
And in this case, there was an extensive search for items of evidence on this case, in this car, right?
To my understanding, yes.
Well, they tore apart the headliner, right?
Yes.
Took everything out of the trunk,
Yes.
put it up on the lift, and looked at everything underneath it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that important for you as someone who's going to come in and analyze the evidence of the case?
Some of those features and information collected can be very pertinent to the analysis that I may perform later with some of the collected evidence. We ultimately won't know, or I ultimately won't know until I'm submitted evidence to analyze, and then I can refer back to the images taken by crime scene and our detectives in order to put information together if necessary.
I'm going to put image M back up of the three, P, O, and N. Were there burn marks?
When I went down to take a look at the vehicle, I observed on the roof of the vehicle, in this image, which would be below the defects, what was appeared and very consistent with a muzzle blast and cylinder gap burn of a revolver being discharged almost on top or just slightly above the surface of the roof. So as if the revolver were to be laid on the roof at the time of discharge, or very close.
Well, what if it was 2 feet above the roof when it was discharged, the firearm? Would there be that type of defect?
No, ma'am, there would not. It has to be almost in direct contact.
To get that type of mark left behind from the gases being expended?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, I'm going to put exhibit O up. Has the process started at this point regarding the trajectory rods?
Yes, ma'am. You can see just to the right of the placard number 30, a trajectory rod going from the rear of the car towards the front of the car. And in the upper left-hand corner of the image, you can see a trajectory rod going from left to right, so driver's side to passenger side, down and through the roof of the vehicle, and this would have been associated with the bullet impact labeled as in.
And can you tell from what you saw with the car and with the images, the direction of fire on N?
In would have been from the driver's side of the vehicle to the passenger side of the vehicle in a downward direction.
I'm now going to put exhibit P as in Paul, Bill, up on Yama. What is it that we're looking at here?
Across the middle of the image, there's a trajectory rod coming from the headrest area of the back seat across to the driver's headrest, as well as a trajectory rod coming through the roof and headliner. Once again, this trajectory rod will be associated with the bullet impact on the roof, labeled as N for Nancy.
Exhibit Q, back up. Is that the N as in Nancy, the trajectory rod that we see in Q, that we also see in P? Or is
Yeah.
it the whole?
Yes, ma'am. The trajectory rod on the top of this image would be going through the hole labeled as N.
I'm now going to put exhibit U up, I'm sorry, image U up. Is that the same trajectory rod that we just saw?
Yes, ma'am, it is. Going through hole labeled N.
From the direction of travel from the driver's side toward the passenger side?
Yes, ma'am, and downward.
And is that what's also in V as in Victor?
Yes, ma'am. This view is from the rear passenger door looking towards the driver's side of the vehicle, and you can see the trajectory rod coming through bullet hole N.
Now, I'm going to put image W up. There appears to be an item in that image labeled number 28 that was impounded. Do you know what item number 28 was?
Item number 28 was a bullet jacket fragment.
Turner, may I approach the witness?
You may.
What is a bullet jacket fragment?
So all modern ammunition will have what's referred to as a jacket on the outside, and it is a metallic, generally copper, encasement of a lead core. So it's the metal housing on the outside. So when I refer to something just as a jacket fragment, that means the core is no longer present, so it doesn't have the lead anymore, it's just the copper that was on the outside.
I'm now going to show you, sir, exhibit X. Is that a different angle of item number 28?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And now, item number Y. Judge, may we approach?
You may.
I interrupted you. So is this a close-up of item number 28 that was impounded that you ultimately analyzed, sir?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Now we're going to AA of that exhibit. Why is this image important to your analysis?
This image shows two defects or holes in the rear passenger seat. One being, and it's difficult to see in the image.
Let me put BB up.
There we go. The one labeled R is a defect in the seat belt, and then Q is actually in the seat back itself. Once again, rear passenger seat.
So we use terms like defect, is that a hole in common parlance?
Yeah, bullet hole, yes.
Can you tell the direction of travel of Q?
Q is difficult to tell directionality because of the tearing that is around the edges of that hole. It could be caused by something coming from behind, pushing that material out. It can also,
I'll put CC up. And also what?
it can also be caused by something coming in that is no longer, by a bullet no longer perfectly shaped, so that it's impacting and then tearing that material down as it passes through. The damage to the seatbelt labeled as R appears
DD up, help you.
appears to be coming from the back through because the fibers are pushed to the inside of the vehicle. And this is based on my analysis of the photographs, not those physical defects or holes in the seat.
I'm now going to put exhibit EE up. And what does exhibit EE show us?
This is showing the path of a bullet with a trajectory rod coming in from the rear of the vehicle. This is where the rear window would have been going across here. This is impacting behind the headrest and below the headrest, traveling from the rear of the vehicle towards the front.
Exhibit FF.
This is just a different angle showing a close-up of where that bullet passed underneath what would be the rear passenger side headrest.
What do you call the interior roof of a car, sir?
The headliner.
And in this case, was the headliner actually taken off?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to put exhibit QQ on the envelope. What is it that we're looking at here?
This image, you are looking at what would be the top of the headliner. So if you're sitting in a vehicle and you look up and see the fabric headliner in your car, this would be the padding that is between that headliner and the physical metal roof.
And now, sir, OO, is this now that same item in a different condition?
Yes, this is the same area of the headliner, but with pieces of the padding or sound dampening material separated.
Was something found by investigators between that padding in the headliner and the second sheet of material?
Yes, there were some bullet fragments that were recovered.
And was there an analysis by you of item number 32, the bullet fragments that were recovered?
Yes, ma'am.
Exhibit NN, what are we looking at?
I believe that is a close-up of where some of the fragments were recovered in the headliner.
Now, in exhibit MM, which is next to NN as in Nancy, there appears to be some grayish discoloration there. Can you explain to us what it is that we are looking at there, if you can?
Based upon this image, so there's two areas of discoloration, one directly to the left of the placard number 32, and then one which will be in the lower left-hand corner of the image. Both of these correspond to the two bullet holes in the roof of the vehicle. So what you're looking at here will be debris from that bullet physically going through the metallic roof of the vehicle. So splashing of lead and other debris caused by that impact.
Are you talking about what is depicted in image A of that exhibit?
Yes, it would be holes Q and N as in Nancy.
Now, did it appear that Q corresponded, or N, as in Nancy, corresponded with anything related to item 32?
It appears as if Q corresponds with 32.
So what do you know based upon Q in item 32 that was recovered?
They were small jacket fragments that were similar in construction to other fragments that I received.
And if the court will allow it, it's new, we can talk about that more.
Agreed. It is time for our lunch break. We will be back at 1:30. Please remember the admonition applies. You are not to discuss the case while you are on break. Thank you and enjoy your lunch.
All right.
You may leave the witness stand. Thank you. Anything we need to address?
Your Honor, I have two additional witnesses after Mr. Beddow for this afternoon. Kendra Griffey and Hugo Lopez.
And you think those will take the rest of the day?
I do, Judge.
Okay, sounds good. We'll see you back after lunch.
Thank you.
No, remember you got me for Thursday. I thought he did.